everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Everyone recognizes the importance of the Soros network at this point. It's regularly called out even by top politicians like Donald Trump when he's referencing different different legislators, different lawyers, different organizations that seem to be heavily influenced by the shadowy society. We all know George Soros, but of course his time is coming to an end, and that empire has to go somewhere. So a man who has written literally the book on the heir to the Soros empire is Matt Palumbo. He is the author of The Heir. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you so much. I came just in time. It came yesterday, so it was very lucky timing. It's always great when you spend, a year or so writing it. You go through 6 months of editing. You finally get the copies. You open it up. The first thing you see is a typo.
Yep.
So it's the greatest experience.
The most exciting thing for me right now is my book is going to go into second edition, and I can fix the typos I found again.
It was the most minor thing. I just spelled the guy's name wrong, and I'm thinking, well, he's a liberal, so maybe I'll play it off as like disrespect. It wasn't a typo. It was, that's what it was. But no, there's always 2 or 3 you miss. But it's so funny how quickly you notice them right when it's too late. So that's a lesson to writers everywhere. Always do one more reading.
Yeah, if you ever want to write a book, let me promise you, the hell of your own making you have created will be the editorial process. Have no doubt about that. But enough inside baseball for authors. We're talking about the Soros network today. Now, like I said, everyone, it's almost ubiquitous at this point. If you're talking about politics, even geopolitical, across the globe, you have to talk about George Soros and his impact. So I'm sure some people are familiar, some people might not be. Let's start at the beginning. Before we get to Alex Soros, who is George Soros? Where has he amassed the wealth and power that he has? And what is this organization that he's created?
So he is a Hungary-born billionaire. Obviously, he was not a billionaire when he was born, but he was educated in London at the London School of Economics from undergrad through his PhD, and started a hedge fund in the U.S. And I've read a lot of his financial work. The Alchemy of Finance is one that's very well known, and it is sort of a revolutionary text in that it is a challenge to econ and finance 101 and what is conventional wisdom, and it's just an entirely new way of thinking about things. So, for instance, one of his concepts he came up with in finance was called reflexivity, which means that expectations can become reality. So, if you would invest in something and then you yourself create an expectation of what's going to happen next, other investors might then pile in, and then you can sell off, and you just through expectations, you made something happen and were able to profit from it. Now, that concept of his was later deployed by him when it comes to media, and having basically a media echo chamber that he funds and has representation in. And in my book about the father, I have a chapter where I go through and I define it by, is it a group he's funded or given a grant to? And the other way is, well, what if we have someone who is on the board of a group that George Soros predominantly funds, or at least plurality majorly funds, who is also on the board of a major publication, website, ABC, CBS, etc., one of the 3-letter names. And it's an entire page list of pretty much every single place you could imagine. And, that obviously doesn't mean they control the entire narrative there. They could just be 1 or 2 seats at the table. But it's certainly a lot more influence than not having a Soros person there. And one of the things I did after making the list was I would just type George Soros's name into the search bar in those publications. And if they were ever reporting on his influence, they would do this sort of Republicans pounce format where you're crazy for thinking there's influence, or downplaying it, or the last cycle of the liberal narrative where it's happening but it's good. So everything was in those categories. But the Open Society Foundation is George Soros's, or I'll go back a second. Soros Funds Management is his hedge fund. He used those profits to fund the Open Society Foundations, and he made an enormous amount of money from Soros Funds Management. At least when I had written the book about the father 3 or 4 years ago, in terms of percent return on investment, it was the second highest of any hedge fund to ever exist. The only person who outperformed him was Ray Dalio, a very famous investor. But it was the kind of investment where, $1 million becomes $1 billion over the life cycle of the fund, which is 60 or 70 years, but still that is massively outperforming, again, every single fund on the planet except one. So very successful. I make the case that he insider traded here and there, uses politics to his advantage to buy assets cheap, but the numbers are the numbers. And that is what funded his whole so-called philanthropic empire. Now, as is the case with any philanthropy, there are some legitimate projects he funds. You throw in building wells in Africa here and there, building a school here and there that looks legitimate. It's sort of the Pablo Escobar model where you were buying favor with the population and then going to later influence it. One of the people who reviewed my book and actually worked on it quite a bit with me was Albania's first president after communism. He was telling me that when Soros came in the country, they were thrilled because they're like, we have absolutely nothing. This guy is giving us all this money to build schools and a lot of infrastructure and get internet set up. Like, this is pretty awesome that someone wants to help us. And then within years, it became clear, well, the schools that he's paying for are teaching the sort of ideology they just broke free from under communism. Obviously, Soros is more not quite as left-wing as communism, but is to the left, is very far left and is against the values of the new country they were trying to promote. And that story in particular of Albania is, I think, the longest in the book, and just it gives a sort of ground zero for how Soros infiltrates nations. It was the first country where he was able to completely rewrite their constitution. And then my friend I had just mentioned, who refused to work with him early into the country's history after that, ended up getting sanctioned by Soros allies in the Biden administration 30 years later. So it was a grudge that he held for a very long time. And the son is still very active there, but I don't want to ramble on any one country. But that is the general way he does it. USAID, I think, is one that became much more widely known thanks to Elon Musk. In fact, I had written and mentioned USAID programs in the past in my writings, but did not realize just how big it was. And Soros benefited from it in multiple ways. And the most common way would be he would use it to complement a project he's already working on. So it might be a group that he funds gets USAID funding, either being a group he owns or he founded and majority funds, or just has some stake in, or a group that he doesn't necessarily fund, but is ideologically aligned that he gets funding to then work with him. And when under the Obama administration, George was able to get the rules changed for what you have to do to get USAID funding, and he tied it to politics. You have to be pro-gay marriage, LGBT, whatever the latest thing the athlete people are throwing out, pro-prostitution, very pro-weak drug laws. And again, these are for, listen, not every USAID project was BS. It was more just the money wasn't even getting to them. But, you could be a group that's building wells in Africa, and it's like, all right, I got to be for trans prostitutes now. Like, what am I signing on for? What is the applicant? How is this even applicable? But that was another very major way he was able to. So I guess to stop the risk of me rambling, I'll sum it up with that.
So a couple questions kind of flow out of that explanation. My first one would be, so it sounds like Soros genuinely did have some level of financial genius, right?
Yes.
But how did he fall into this, right? Like you said, he wasn't born a millionaire. So what led him into having that level of financial acumen? Did he have a mentor? Was he brought up in some kind of system? Is he just the most amazing, intellectual in this area that's ever been born and happened to just explode onto the scene? What are the origins of him rising into that position?
Well, starting to work in finance in the U.S. and then being able to raise money from investors and then taking it from there. The most influential man who at the London School of Economics that he studied under was a man named Karl Popper. Karl Popper created the concept of the Open Society. So that's what the Open Society Foundation is named after. And it's funny because in reading his writings, his understanding of what an open society is different from Soros, which just surprised me given he named his own organization after that and thinks so highly of him. Because Karl Popper cited America as a perfect example of an open society. George Soros saw it as the opposite and wanted to radically change it. So it's a pretty big thing for you to disagree with your mentor on, but that was one of the things he ended up disagreeing with Karl Popper on.
Well, and that's my second big question out of this, right? Because obviously this man is a very successful capitalist. You know, so whatever else you want to say about him, Marxist economics, at least in his own personal practice, don't seem to be central to his ideology. And I think there's often some confusion with this, because I'm kind of okay with the wider definition of communism just being when ugly people want to destroy society and tear down God. Right. But
Mystery Grove. I love that tweet.
It's a fantastic, it's a legendary tweet for a reason. But I do think it's worth separating at some level Marxist economics from what I would just say is like progressive humanism, right? And it's interesting that Soros adopts this hyper progressive humanism. As you say, he goes even beyond his own mentor when it comes to the open society. What do you know what the origin of this kind of rabid political ideology is? It doesn't make sense for it to just be Marxism. Why is he so dedicated to this like broad spectrum, LGBTQ progressive ideology across the world? Because it's not just being applied to the United States. It's not just like, well, I wanted to demoralize the United States because I recognize like this is a bad ideology, so I'll apply it there. No, he wants this in every country across the world, and is really imposing a large amount of influence through his wealth to do exactly that, basically buying out entire countries when he recognizes the power of the fortune he's amassed. So what is the motivation behind that ideology ultimately?
Yeah, I've heard it also called gay race communism, which very succinctly tells you everything you need to know. That's what is one of the harder questions I would get when I would, research the book, because saying something like, well, he's just an evil guy sounds like a lazy cop-out answer, but is that wrong? In that, we're smart guys. He's a smart guy. We know that every policy he favors is a net negative. I've researched a lot of the things he's claimed that are successes, and they are the opposite. I've gone through a lot of research with people who also went through all the DAs he funded and his son continues to fund, and it's been a disaster everywhere. So there's really no benefit of the doubt of, the sort of, high school debate version of politics where we're all working for the same common good and we have a different way of getting there. He is just a bad guy. And, I know there's a strain of leftism that believes you have to kind of completely destroy a society from within to then rebuild it into whatever image they want. But I'm always wondering, like, do they ever even get to the rebuild in the image they want? Because it is that Mystery Grove tweet where there's something about the progressive mind where, like, after Trump cleaned up DC, there were liberals complaining that there weren't street vendors all over the streets, and there was no homeless people. And I'm like, we're not in the same reality as these people. So the fact that you and I are not criminally insane does make it very hard for us to model those kind of minds. But that is a struggle. And his son, I think, is at least cognizant of the fact that the optics are not very good on him, and his PR has been a lot better than his father's. Like when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, he put out an extremely normal statement that it was of just, we condemn this horrible thing. It wasn't, but he said bad things, or even though the stuff he said, it was just a straight, this is horrible, can't have it. He praised, the ceasefire in Gaza and Israel, and didn't weigh it towards one side, just made it, we praise it. So that doesn't mean he actually thinks that way. In fact, I doubt he himself is drafting those, but he's trying to make it at least seem like he's more moderate than his father. But in the chapter of the book on the DAs that he's funded separately from his father, they're just as insane, if not more. So I don't think he actually is.
Yeah, sorry if I laughed there, but I was just trying to imagine him like adjusting his mask over his lizard face, I will actually look like a human. Like at least I'm capable of.
He does not talk like one. Have you ever heard him speak?
No.
Someone said it perfectly that he talks like a record skipping. And if anyone looks up him speaking after this, you're going to laugh when you think of that description.
Well, let me ask you this as a motivation, and I'm just speculating here, but I always want to assume, no human walks around thinking I'm the villain, right? Like, so unlike the left has no theory of mind for us, right? Like, they don't bother, they can't understand how conservatives' brains work. We at least understand where the left is coming from. We disagree with them, but we have to live in their world every day, so we kind of understand their motivations better because their logic is like something we have to like parrot to get through HR meetings and stuff like that, right? So I try not to just dismiss the motivations here, but I'm thinking about this. When R.R. Reno wrote the book Return of the Strong Gods, and in that book he talks about the open society and kind of post World War II, the idea of guys like Popper to basically strip out all the elements that make a civilization virile because they're worried about the return of a strong man, right? Like they never want to see Hitler or Mussolini or these guys again. We need to get rid of basically all the passions and all of the loyalties and all the identities that kind of forced us into this World War II mentality. And after we do that, then society will be open, and we won't have these strongly held opinions about race or about gender or about sexuality or about religion or any of these things, and we can just let all that stuff go and kind of not have those deeper passions. And I wonder if that's part of Soros's ultimate motivation, even if he saw more of that in the United States than Popper did. If ultimately his idea and the reason it becomes global is that if he can kind of wear down all those edges, put all the strong gods away, then he will not have to worry about the kind of the return of these feelings that he feared so deeply. I don't know if that plays into it or not, but
that explanation is what I always thought underpinned really the case for mass immigration. And people legitimately think, all right, so you've had trouble between white people and black people, and no matter what, there's always going to be some sort of friction. But if we take in 80 new groups that all have gripes, somehow there's less overall. Like
if we just make everyone a minority, then we get rid of minority status, right?
There are ethnic conflicts going on the planet that we don't even know about because they're so obscure. It's between one tribe and another, and I don't know. It was just, it's hard to say naive because I feel like it had to have been deliberate because it was so obvious that mass migration is going to cause a breakdown in social trust. And in fact, even the New York Times once published something on that. And I don't know if it necessarily correlates with our modern era of immigration, but the sexual stuff is the worst it's ever been. Violence is and a lack of trust is I don't think violence is the worst it's ever been, but social trust is the worst it's ever been. And it's just we're getting the exact opposite effects of what you were just saying they thought would happen if they did legitimately think that. I mean, now I think with Soros it might actually just be the opposite. He knew all that was going to happen and does also push mass migration groups. And not only that, he also funds legal service, like legal pro bono firms in Latin America to provide legal assistance to the people trying to come to this country illegally. So the entire caravan is funded by him to some extent.
So obviously Soros is getting up there. George Soros is getting up there in age. I think I saw before the interview is like 95 at this point, which really just shows you that only the good die young. But ultimately, he's going to have to hand this off, and that's what your new book is about. That obviously George Soros is no longer going to be the major player. That Alex Soros is stepping into that position. What do we need to know about Alex, and is there any significant transition that we should expect between these two figures?
So it made headlines that Alex had officially been handed the throne in June of 2023, and a lot of people didn't know that, and a lot of headlines, even on Fox or New York Post, they'll say George Soros does X, and it's actually Alex behind it. So it hasn't been as, I guess, widely known as I thought. So hopefully, the book does help with that. And he was made chairman of the board in December of 2022. So, I think that's probably when he was at least running the whole show. But when it comes to segments of the Open Society Foundation, he was in control for a much longer period. He revealed in an interview with, I think it was Financial Times, that there was a point in 2015 when he was in Europe with his father, and his father said, I think I'm at an age where I can't really travel here that much anymore. I want you to take over Europe for me. So Alex has been taking, pretty much running the show in Europe for the OSF for about a decade now. And there was a time in the book, for instance, when I was talking about regime change in North Macedonia. And around that time, Alex had posted a photo to his Facebook of him and his father meeting the new prime minister of North Macedonia. And Alex phrased it as, "It's a pleasure to introduce my father to the prime minister," meaning it was someone that he knew, and he was just introducing his father to him. And, the phrasing gave it away that, well, Alex was the one actually behind that, and his father was kind of just getting shown the aftermath. So after he took over the Open Society Foundation, he actually laid off about 30% of the staff, which it is amazing how in any NGO there is like a double-digit percentage of people doing nothing. So I guess credit to him for doing that. But he's doubled down efforts in Ukraine, Albania, and Eastern Europe as a whole, which I noticed. I'm like, well, that's the most corrupt part of Europe, so that's a convenient place to consolidate. But Albania is the country he's visited the most. He's been pictured with their prime minister, the socialist prime minister, about 30 times on social media. Their former prime minister showed me what he said were flight logs showing that Alex was there over 100 times in recent years. So if those are legitimate, and I don't know how I would possibly know how to check if they are, but if they are, it shows that he is hiding a lot of his meetings. And I only point that out because he's much more of an open book than his father, and that you can go to his Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. And every single day, it's like a who's who of the world's most powerful people, and he's practically bragging about knowing them. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, yeah. So, and then like in Poland, for instance, he was purchasing leading media companies and tabloids ahead of the last election. But fortunately, the Trump-backed Law and Justice candidate won. So he didn't have a win there. And then I also talk about, too, like his influence in Ukraine. And it's a lot of the European research was tough because the only reporting on it was in those languages. So I had to figure out which key terms to search in a different language. Like, all right, what Ukrainian words am I going to search to try to find stuff about Alex? But he did give Zelensky's wife's charity a $1 million donation. And then it was subsequently pictured with Zelensky a few times. He's met a lot of top members of their equivalent of the parliament, or their parliament, I should say. He's a picture with Zelensky's right-hand man on a number of occasions, and they've wished each other happy birthday on X and Facebook. So he is ingrained with a lot of these people, and it's early enough on in his reign, I guess, where not for every possible link I can prove there's something shady going on, but it's more of a preview of here's everyone he knows, here's kind of where to keep your eye on.
So a lot of people have looked at the violence that's occurring in the United States right now. Antifa, many other groups that seem to coordinate together on a regular basis, but technically we're told they don't exist. And if they do exist, they certainly aren't working together. They certainly just have all of their information and funding and things coming simultaneously. A lot of people have pointed to the fact that a number of these NGOs are receiving Soros money. And that they might be key to fomenting the violence in the United States. Now, you've already pointed out that Soros-backed NGOs are working on getting people into the country illegally and everything else. So I don't think it's a wild stretch to imagine they'd also be coordinating in order to do violence against ICE to keep these people inside the United States. How much credibility is there to the idea that the Soros network is funding this? And if so, are they just an ancillary funder to this, or are they core to pushing this agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a sum of parts kind of thing. Like that $1 billion, the Maoist who funds the Party for Socialism and Liberation is a kind of a similar funder. But there was Soros money in the LA riots against ICE recently. A lot of the No Kings protests, although to be fair, that was like a million different groups that assembled. And then you go back to the 2014 Michael Brown riots, and a lot of the groups there were funded by him. And the George Floyd riots, a lot of what they would do then is they would fund these like Black Lives Matter adjacent groups. So it would be called, the Movement for Black Lives. And then when Candace Owens said, he's funded Black Lives Matter 50 million, PolitiFact goes, no, they didn't. It was this other group that's a complete clone of it, but has a different name, so it's not true. So he does that, and this is where it gets harder to prove, but the sort of funds category where he's layering the money through groups, like going to the Tides Foundation, which then gives to other groups. When I was reviewing the most recent year of grants from the OSF that were $500,000 or more, all the ones that were like 10+ million to a group, you go to their website and it would present itself as like a normal activist group, but there would never be any news articles about them. Their social media would be dead, inactive, no followers. Their address is like either a PO box or an office space in like some uninhabitable shithole where a 6-story home is $5. A place where no one would actually have an office if they're making $10 million in grants. So then I would go through their financials, and they were just pass-through entities disguised as activist groups, where that money would then go to a different group that would go to a different group. And it makes it impossible to prove where any one specific dollar ends up. Like if I give $1 million to someone who was $1 billion and they spend $1 million on, I don't know, weapons, I could technically be like, well, mine was part of the $999 million that wasn't spent on it. And that is what the OSF does when they try to deny things. Or my favorite line is, we didn't knowingly give a grant to a group that was going to do violence. And I'm like, they have a whole history of doing violence. You're hoping your dollars are the ones that coincidentally do what exactly? So that's how they hide behind those allegations. But he's behind that. And then also, and one of the chapters about Alex fighting the Trump agenda, a lot of the immigration-related lawsuits, and most of which have failed, fortunately, but are from Soros-funded legal groups. And this includes groups like the ACLU, which Soros has given over $50 million to, although obviously they have so many other funders. I don't actually weigh them that highly, but a lot of other smaller groups where Soros is a very large percentage of their funding. And the trying to block birthright citizenship, illegals in the census, things like that. Soros groups have been behind in the courts.
So obviously, as you say, very complicated network of money laundering. You're giving large foundations money. They're giving you money. All those are going to different organizations, many of which with the exact same mission, but with 15 different names. So you can never nail down one as the major actor. None of this, of course, is a mistake. Obviously, we know that there's a reason that they structure their organizations like this. And unfortunately, it's been very successful. And that begs the question, right? Like when we look at these smaller countries, I can understand ultimately how George Soros buys Lithuania, right? Like yeah. I would hope that the leaders would ultimately be more loyal to their own nation than they would be to this outside funding. But you get it; it's a poor country. They need the industry. Who's going to turn down all of this ultimately? However, he doesn't just have that influence in these small, easily buyable kind of third world-ish nations. He has that level of influence in top tier first world nations as well. And that really makes us wonder, why is a guy who, for all we can tell, just has like money, just has a fortune, why is he allowed to go in and buy large chunks of sovereign nations with military and intelligence assets? Like at the end of the day, if I'm one of these major countries and a guy like this is coming in to buy up all of my politicians and open my borders and destroy the ability to put criminals in jail, well, let's just say, some wet work might get involved. Like there are solutions to this problem that are available to people with, large missiles and strike teams and Navy SEALs that aren't available to maybe Latvia. So why are people allowing the manipulation of their sovereign, geopolitically dominant governments by a guy who ultimately shouldn't be able to, wield a single troop?
Well, because we've had people in office who've been benefiting from it. I mean, Obama took his money. The George McCain Institute was funded by George Soros. Even as they were putting out anti-George Soros materials, they were being funded by George Soros. And Cindy McCain and Alex are good friends. They work together. They're photographed together every year and speak highly of each other. So even like the old guard conservative right would, rally against George Soros, but it was one of those things that was performative. Like we learned, for instance,
is this like where we get Compact Magazine, which is supposed to be anti-globalist, but is funded directly by the biggest globalist in the world?
There was a whole conservative class who just wanted to endlessly critique the left, and we learned too after Roe v. Wade was struck down that like half of the conservative National Review types were all pro-choice, but just thought Roe v. Wade would never get struck down, so they'd never have to actually
right
for a legitimate pro-life position. But yeah, a lot of stuff like that, and I always wonder like what would the angle be to go after him, because when it comes to funding politicians, it's presumably going to get upheld as a free speech thing. Obviously, there's a lot of people giving money in politics, although Soros is the most destructive. But hey, isn't it? I suppose a lawyer would have to argue, well, who gets to define subjective, destructive? I'd be sounding like a libertarian. But I think the RICO case from Trump is the strongest, in that he is knowingly funding groups that are doing harm, and that's why I've noticed in their press releases they say they don't knowingly fund them. That's their defense in response to the new attention. And the word knowing is doing a lot of very, very heavy lifting. So, listen, the ultimate test would be if they keep funding them after saying we're not knowingly doing this, then it's 100%, although they, of course, know. And then I think a tax audit is in order, in that I went through a lot of groups where the financials just do not make any sense to me. There'll be one where they'll be in an office and the office expense is like $100 a year and there's no computer or internet expense. And I'm like, what exactly is going on here? Like, even if you're a front group, you expect that to be a couple grand. Am I wrong? So just weird stuff like that. And even so, the process kind of is the punishment. We've learned from all the people going after Trump, and I think that's sort of overdue. And they'll probably find a lot of things we never even thought we would have found. The discovery would reveal a lot, and there's just no reason not to, if we can.
Do you have any inside information on that RICO case? Because I'll be honest, I want it to be true, man. Like, I want to believe, I really do. I want to trust the plan here. But I'm going to be honest, Pam Bondi doesn't fill me with a lot of competence. Just doesn't feel like the number one selection criteria there. And so I just worry that ultimately we're going to hear about, well, we're going to put this together and it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
And then like in a year, maybe if we're lucky, we might get like a one prosecution. Like, do you really feel like they have what it takes to pull this RICO prosecution together?
Well, she hasn't said she has the RICO docs in her desk, so that's that's a positive.
It might not disappear.
I mean, we got some prosecutions after Trump. Remember when he wrote on True Social to her and then said it was supposed to be a direct message? I think it was supposed to be public to show to all of us, listen, I'm trying, guys, and then played it off as that, so we would delete it. But he does seem to be putting pressure on her. I mean, the Epstein stuff really disappointed a lot of people, and I think they want to avoid another thing like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what about, we know he's successful in pushing his agenda in the West, right? We know that first George and now Alex Soros have been very successful in opening up Western countries. Are they trying to do the same thing elsewhere? Are they getting into places like China? And if so, is the government of China as flexible about this with the United States? Because again, the United States might get stuck somewhere in procedure, but I feel like the CCP in China, they just disappear you, right? Like, so I don't know that they'd be as careful about the implementation of hard power to stop this if they ultimately think that Soros is undermining their culture, their way of life, opening up their borders.
So in China specifically, George has actually been very critical of the CCP. But if you look at the timing of it, it's because they had cracked down on a number of Chinese companies that he's invested in. Not because they were targeting him just in general, but it also then impacted him. Like I think one of them, it was like the Chinese version of Uber. They went after, and the stock lost like 90% of its value in a week, and obviously that cost George a lot of money. So his criticisms were truly motivated by him losing money because of them. But I don't think he's going to have any influence there specifically. And, you know, he's been kicked out of countries like India and Russia, so none there. Albania, the one where Alex has the most, they are trying to push this sort of third gender thing. Although the public there, it's this weird politics where the Socialist Party has, I think, 70% of the seats, but with 55% of the vote, just do their, however their proportional system works. I guess it was a bit disproportionate, but the opposition to that stuff is like 60+%. So the public, fortunately, in a lot of these Eastern European countries where he's pushing it, is very much against it, which is good. It can be forced on a population through media. Like even something like, support for gay marriage, whether you're in favor of it or not, that was an entirely manufactured campaign where the entirety of the media presented an idea, and we were kind of told all they want is marriage. And once it happened, we thought like, oh, all right, well, we don't have to hear about this anymore, thank God. We know how that goes. But no, the left really never gives up. And whether or not it's Soros or somewhere else, it is also going to require a lot of people in the media to resist it too, but that's ultimately where it's going to get pushed. Although I do think culture is downstream from government as well.
I agree, and I think this is an interesting problem because obviously one of the issues in the new world, as you point out, I mean, it's already an issue previously, but media has come to dominate everything. People don't live real lives; it's all mediated in the very real sense of people don't go out and experience community. It's all through their social media. It's all through the news they get in television, these kind of things. And so there's very little direct experience. And when you're living lives like that, you're particularly vulnerable to media manipulation because you just have no contact with reality. Everything is disembodied, and your hyper reality can be tuned by people who are very good at it. And the countries that it sounds like most of the countries that have successfully resisted him are ones that a lot of people would call authoritarian, right? Like they're, Russia, China, or, countries like India that have a significant barrier culturally that are a lot harder to manipulate in those ways. So some of it might just be that Western nations are culturally more influenced by the Anglosphere media, and therefore that kind of flows through them. But also it feels like there's something about the liberal democracy, something about this mass democratic apparatus that's easily manipulated ultimately by media that's particularly vulnerable to Soros's game plan. Is there anything to that? And what about a country like Hungary with Viktor Orban? Obviously, he was born Hungarian. You have a Hungarian government that now is a little more. They call themselves an illiberal democracy. Is there some kind of barrier there that's working in a way that maybe it isn't working in other European nations?
Well, I've noticed. I mean, I think this media has created definitely something of a gender divide, and that men are now getting pushed very far to the right because of it, and women are more to the left as ever. And I don't know, like we have sort of had this general principle of don't be a jerk, which is a great principle, but there are times you kind of have to be one. And you see this in things like the trans issue, where, Tommy Lahren I saw once was tweeting about the pronoun issue, and she's had me on her show, so therefore is a very good person. But she said something I disagreed with, which was, well, it made the point, like, it's not that big a deal. It's just calling someone a different name. And, well, yes, it seems small, but doing that is a domino. And you push one domino, and it's going to by the time the last one falls, it's going to be a something that you cannot even conceptualize when you're pushing the first one.
Right.
We see this with immigration, where there is no doubt that if you could teleport every immigrant back to their home country where their people are, they're the most like, it would be better off for us, and in the long run, probably maybe even for them, they'd be happy. I don't know. It'd be better for us. But if you are watching someone physically, I don't know, get thrown into a van and they're crying and their children are screaming, you and I realize that is just the necessary cost. And It's a very short-term cost, and the gain we get from that is a million times bigger. But there's a very large percent of the population that cannot tolerate even that anything to, I don't even know to make it the analogy, that ripping off the Band-Aid to get you to somewhere way better. And just can't tolerate that. And I don't know, I think media, it does seems to be having more of an impact on women than men. And actually really in every country. But that seems to be the most effective. It's just the emotional thing, and then plus the false equivalences, because we have a historical narrative in our country that we started violent, horrible slavery. For some reason, then we're badass Antifa warriors, but then we are oppressing our wives and our gay kids. But then, we have the women's movement, the gay movement, the trans movement, the Black Lives Matter, civil rights, and we're here. And it's, this fiction, it didn't really happen like that, but we, and most of our minds from school have that narrative in our head. And it makes the media, it makes it very easy to push this idea that whatever the, current thing is, well, in this historic narrative, that's just the latest thing at the end. And progress is perfectly linear, according to them. So, well, if you're against trans, well, you're right here. So someone looking back at you're going to look like someone who wanted to own Black people. And that's how they talk about these issues. And of course, as I just said, the narrative, the structure makes no sense, because white men in the 50s are simultaneously racist, but also like kicking Nazi ass 5 years prior. So nothing really makes any sense, but that is how they've taught people to think, and the media capitalizes on it. And then also they rewrite the past, in that, like, it used to be in the 90s, if you were to watch a remake of a movie, it was just a remake of the movie. On Netflix, if they do a remake, they just take a movie from the 90s and make it the demographics of like 2300, and then to give people this impression that, well, this is the way things always were, this is the way things they're always going to be. It's just a false sense of reality. I saw, like, I'm not kidding, if you looked at a YouTube video of like a baseball game from the 50s, there will be comments like, why are there so many white people? Like, people just cannot conceive what the world of even 30 years ago was. And the left just wants you to think no one was ever happy. There was, even if everything on aggregate is better today, that there was nothing individually better back then. There's nothing to be learned from the past. And therefore, anything they do is revolution. It's this year zero thinking of a new kind. I know, I'm rambling, so I'll take it back to you.
No, it is the true progressive belief, right, through and through. It is Whig history at the bottom. So, yeah. Let me ask you this. We've already discussed the RICO case, the possibility of that, right? But let's say that, Pam Bondi sat you down tomorrow, Donald Trump pulls you in and says, all right, Matt, what are like your top suggestions for battling Soros's influence? Besides going after the RICO case with the NGO networks, what other steps could you take to limit or eliminate entirely Soros's influence in the U.S.?
Well, I know this isn't exactly what you asked, but to start with the RICO and IRS, I would just put together a list of what I think the most violent groups are. And then within the IRS ones, the ones whose financials I looked through that I thought kind of generate the most, I don't know, trouble. It is hard. What would my strategy be? I feel like that's actually a possibility, so I should have an idea. I mean, I think individually targeting politicians that have the most Soros money and tying them to Soros would be very effective. Listen, Viktor Orban had a lot of success, and he invested a ton of taxpayer money, and we wouldn't even have to use taxpayer money. There's other groups that could do it, but invested taxpayer money into anti-Soros campaigns, anti-Soros billboards. Soros reportedly was very upset because they would put anti-Soros posters on the bottom of public buses, so you'd step on his face when you'd walk on one. Maybe not that far, but I think an anti-Soros campaign plus linking politicians to him and making it toxic to take his money would actually go very far away.
Is there a way? I mean, obviously we know he's funded these DAs and all these politicians. Is the money laundering just too rampant? Is it just too impossible to track? Or is there a way we could target his funds? We could shut down those specific donation sources?
Well, you would then also have to go over to the groups that he's funding through.
Sure.
And a lot of them too, like a lot of them are shells. So, it's a difference between targeting a shell company and a legitimate business. And like a lot of them are in that category. So I would think they would be easier to go through. One group that does do a very good job of tracing the money is Influence Watch. And then on Twitter, that account Data Republican does a really good job of breaking them out. And you still can't prove that any individual dollar went to X, Y, or Z cause, but it does break down the networks very well. That she would actually be a very good asset for them as well.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to move over to the questions of the people real quick. We got a few over there, but before we do, can you remind people where they can pick up their book and when, if they want to learn more about it?
So it's on Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. I think it was probably the top two that anyone would ever buy them on. Or Barnes & Noble, like the physical store too. When you search for it, search Alex Soros, because I made a major error and didn't realize there's a best-selling series called The Air that destroyed my SEO. So,
oh no,
Alex Soros, Palumbo, The Air, but it'll be there. It comes out on Tuesday. My understanding is that if you order it now, it'll ship either by Tuesday or you'll get it Tuesday. But you'll
usually send it out at least the day of.
So yeah, something like that. So obviously, highly recommended by Book of the Year, according to me.
Many people are saying. Many people are saying. All right, guys, make sure that you're checking out Matt Palumbo's book, and let's head over to the questions of the people real quick. Let's see here. Lowbrow says, Matt is a highly regarded guest. Everyone at the James Bailey Read More Book Club is very proud of him. Buy his books. I'm assuming that's an inside joke.
Yeah, James Bailey. We were in a Facebook group together, and there was this liberal named James Bailey who would just like either tell people to read more when he was arguing against them, or he would copy like text from a website, and it would be so long that you keep having to click read more to see what he's trying to say. So it became an inside joke that
gotcha.
Now doesn't a couple hundred people get.
Shannon the Man says, would like to see Athenian Stranger or BAP on. Well, I've actually had Athenian Stranger on several times. I'm pretty sure. Well, no, I've had him on at least twice. I'm pretty sure. More than happy to have him on again. He's a brilliant guy, but you got to have the right topic. You got to dial him in. It's one of those intellects you got to kind of corral a little bit. So always love to have him on when we're discussing a little bit of philosophy. As to BAP, I mean, he's more than welcome to come on. He had some... I think he got a little angry with me when I pointed out that his, anti-Christian stuff was pretty subversive. But he's more than happy to come on. Always enjoyed his work. Don't always agree, but I've always found it at least hilarious. And that is more often the important thing. So happy to speak with him as well. All right, guys, that looks like everything. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Once again, thank you, Matt, for coming on. It's been a pleasure to speak with you guys. Make sure that you're picking up his book. And if it's your first time on this channel, you need to go ahead and click subscribe on YouTube, bell notification, all that stuff, so you know when we go live. If you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure to subscribe to the Auron McIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, leave a rating or review. It helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk with you next time.